Day 130 to 3:13 p.m. Browning Square, Belmar, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Almost a quarter of an hour passed since Mark's game started. In every round, Mark conjured the same attack. The hundreds of balls of electricity floated around him before flying towards the players of the game. However, despite having the same appearance, the nature of every round was never constant. In every round, Mark made the balls of electricity fly differently, from circles to spirals. He even controlled some of the balls in one round like a remote-controlled missile. The speed of the attacks was never constant either. After the second round, he would increase the speed that the balls of electricity flew. Then, slow it down in the next attack before speeding it up once more. It became harder and harder for the outlaws to adapt to the sudden and inconstant changes in speed that the balls of electricity flew. And now, the seventh round just ended, and there was only a fourth of the outlaws remained standing, and of course, just standing. It was because most of them had no energy anymore to move. Among the outlaws, only the Swift brothers and the rainbow-scaled woman remained energetic. They had scorched marks on their bodies, indicating that they were not able to avoid everything. Still, compared to the others, anyone could say that these three had the best chances of surviving. As for the fourth leader, the Speedo guy, he was already at the end of the line. At first, he was able to avoid the attacks by using the cars as shields. But as the game went on, the effects of the electric current in the air started to show. His mutation was something like copper muscles. And copper was a highly conductive metal. Even if he managed to avoid getting hit, a small portion of electricity in the air still entered his body. This muscled man that was only earring a Speedo. While he had the strength, the tenacity, and a body as hard as a copper statue, he was not invincible. Now, encountering his weakness, he already had one of his feet unto his grave. Well, that was nothing but an idiom. There was no way that they would have a grave after this. No one would bother to waste time to bury the bodies of these degenerates. While the outlaws were trying their best to survive the mess they entered, Mark's attention entirely focused on something else. And that was to make himself used to the sensation he felt while using the crystals. Mark could use the crystals to a great extent. However, his controls towards the magic of the crystals were far from perfect. And unlike the other crystals that did not require great control, the wind manipulation crystal was different. The air and the substances that it was composed of was not easy to control. An example of this was when conjuring a ball of air above his palm. It was not as simple as saying that Mark only needed to gather the particles of the air in a single point. He needed a medium to keep the air he gathered intact without dispersing. That was where adding some rotation inside the ball was required, creating a small vortex that would suck in air and keep it in place. There were also other methods of keeping the air gathered aside from forming a vortex. And in fact, using only a vortex spinning in a single direction could barely keep the gathered air into a ball. Thus, it was better to make several layers of air akin to a shell, with each layer spinning in a different direction. And there, a rasenga, a ball of compressed air, was formed. However, precise control was needed to do all that. It was not easy to make the air as hard as a solid ball. That was why, rather than playing with the lives of the outlaws, Mark was focused more on honing his skills and control. Or else, no matter how playful he was, he would not need 10 attacks to kill all these outlaws. Just 3 should be enough. And now, Mark reached that point that he would need to end this game. Buzz. Buzz. Suddenly, like a cell phone in silent mode, the ring on Mark's finger vibrated. It buzzed in intervals, forming a sentence using Morse code. Without a doubt, May already woke up. "Gerger, where are you?" May asked, making Mark tap and send his energy to the ring to send a reply. "I'm just doing something outside. When are you going to return?" May asked again. "I'm almost done here. Can you tell anyone there to ask the captain to send some transport vehicles in my location?" "Where is Gerger right now?" At that question, Mark looked around. "Where is this again?" he murmured as his eyes landed on that concrete signboard. "Browning Square." Tell them to hurry since I already got the prisoners captured by the outlaws. By the way, don't come here and stay in bed. You need to rest. All right? Mark replied to May and did not forget to tell her that, if he did not, she might leave the school to find him, neglecting the rest she needed. Okay. May sent affirmation, though Mark could tell that it felt a bit sulky. Ending the message, Mark turned back to the outlaws. They were all looking at him with confusion on their faces. After all, the round ended already, but Mark was there flapping his wings, staying still in the air. Because of that, some of them had the notion to escape. However, the fear of being caught overwhelmed them more, forcing them to stay. I can't play any longer, unfortunately, Mark said, making the remaining outlaws shiver. Unlike the previous rounds, this time, for sure, Mark was aiming for the kill. Mark stretched out his hand together with the crystals towards the outlaws. Since the outlaws had seen it before several times already, they all knew that once a crystal began to glow brighter, the attack was coming. The remaining outlaws braced themselves as one of the crystals glowed brighter. Unexpectedly, nothing appeared. The outlaws were expecting another barrage of balls of electricity, but there was none. But then, Mark suddenly closed his palm, turning it into a fist. Then, the wind began to blow. Ah! Several screams immediately ensue. The others could not help but look, only to see the bodies of their remaining comrades becoming sliced in half. As it happened too suddenly, not all of them died immediately. Their upper bodies detached, causing them to crawl and flail their arms wildly as they scattered their own blood and guts on the ground. It was a horrifying sight, and none of them saw what kind of attack it was. But that was not all. From the outer parts of the parking lot to the center, the invisible attack continued. More and more outlaws had their torsos and lower bodies separated. Some were fast enough to realize that it was an invisible attack that aimed at their torsos. Some tried to jump, while others crouched. However, the outlaws were unable to find the right timing to evade. Some of those that chose to jump had their legs cut, while those that crouched got their necks and heads cut off. At the end of the 8th attack, only 7 people were left among the outlaws. They were not all the ones left alive. But the remaining others had their legs cut off with no way of evading the next attack. The rainbow-scaled woman looked straight at Mark. Since the start, you have no intention of letting us live, right? She smiled with a fierce expression. Hearing that, Mark shrugged. Yeah? So? Damn it. The woman cursed as she reverted back to her human form. Then, the rainbow-scaled woman took out a pistol from her pocket and pointed at her temple. I don't want to become someone else's toy, she said with a resolute expression as she moved her finger to pull the trigger. But then, ah! The woman cried out in pain as the hand holding the gun separated from her arm. Seeing her hand on the ground, the rainbow-scaled woman glared at Mark. Why? At that question, Mark smiled. Killing yourself is against the rules. Mark replied as he moved his index finger. Swish, the woman's head separated from her body. Then, before the woman's head fell to the ground, a strong gust of wind enveloped the head, causing it to fly towards Mark. Mark caught the head that had a frozen expression of pain on her face. After turning the remaining blood in the head to metal, Mark stored it. He did this not because he wanted to be the one to kill the woman. It was just that if he let her fire that gun on her head, her brain would be damaged, and the ability he would get from her would be weakened. This rainbow scales will suit May, I guess. Mark murmured. It was the main reason he could not let the mutation of that woman go to waste. With the death of the woman, only 6 people were left. Because of the unexpected action of the woman, the speedo guy that was almost dead lasted longer than her. Well, only 6 left, Mark smiled. Time to end this. Mark then pointed his palm once more at the people below. Because of the woman's question, they all had unsightly expressions. They knew that they would die anyway, so. Escape. The older Swift brother shouted. The others were caught off guard, but the younger brother managed to react. The 2 brothers started to run in different directions. However, it was already late. As Mark closed his palm once more, the next attack commenced. The Swift brothers that tried to run away were flung back into the center of the parking area. Unlike yesterday, these two would not be able to escape. It was because Mark could now control the wind in this whole area. And there, like a net, blades of wind converged to the center of the parking area. The remaining outlaws were cut to pieces with only their heads remaining intact. As for the Speedo guy, he had already given up. His head flew off after he stood in place without moving. Everyone died, with only the Swift brothers remaining. The Swift brothers were thrown at the center of the parking area. All the wind blades were now moving towards them. "Stop, sir." The older brother tried to speak, but the barrage of wind blades had already reached them. Bam! 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 Shielding themselves with their armor, they managed to resist longer. However, the two's demise was inevitable as the wind blades slowly chipped their armor. Soon, their armor was broken, and the wind blades penetrated their bodies. Gwa! The Swift brothers roared in both pain and anger. It did not take long, and their roars disappeared. Mark landed in front of the two's corpses. Their bodies were barely damaged because of their armors. Still, it would be difficult for them to keep living after some of the wind blades cut open their torsos. With all the outlaws dead, it was now time to collect the heads. Storing the heads one by one was disgusting in itself, but Mark had no choice. It was better to absorb the abilities privately than tell everyone that he could harvest these mutations to give them to someone else. Mark then turned towards the prisoners and could not help but sigh. The glint of worship in their eyes felt uncomfortable. "Hey, all of you," Mark shouted. "Find guns and bullets and kill the infected outside the walls. Your rescue is coming soon, and they won't be able to come here faster if there's a lot of infected around this place." Hearing that their rescue was coming, the prisoners rejoiced. Not only the people that made them suffer were all dead, but they were going back to their previous lives. Of course, there were a lot of changes. Families and friends of theirs died by the hands of the outlaws. However, they were still alive, and that was what mattered most. Day 130 to 4:21 p.m. Browning Square, Belmar, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Suddenly receiving a tip out of nowhere, Captain Morrison and his soldiers prepared as soon as they could. They did not know how Mays suddenly had this news or if it was true. There was some opposition, and some did not believe it. However, having no lead at all, they could only gamble and try. Still, they went out full force, leaving only necessary personnel to guard the school. After all, it was the outlaws that they were talking about. They were the very same group that pushed this settlement to a corner. If the soldiers wanted to rescue the captured people, they needed to move a lot of resources they had. Despite the preparation, it took them some time to arrive. After all, the event yesterday caused the roads to be filled with infected. Even if they had enough manpower, clearing their way was not easy. But when the soldiers arrived, the only thing they could do was to stare agape at the scene in front of them. The mountain of infected corpses outside the walls, the headless bodies inside the compound, and the prisoners reverently staring at the man the soldiers knew. Mark, on the other hand, was looking around the bodies of the infected scattered around when the soldiers arrived. He could only scratch his head after seeing how much preparation the soldiers had before coming here. He trusted May to relay the very same words he told her through the ring. After all, what he said was to bring transport trucks, and he already got the prisoners. Yet, the soldiers came prepared for battle. Even Roan was present as their main attacker. Captain Morrison and Roan went down from the military convoy and approached Mark, not minding the bloody smell around him. The captain did not know what to say about the current situation. "I only said to bring transport vehicles." Mark shrugged. "Why did you guys bring tanks?" That question made the soldiers troubled. If they knew that there would be no fighting, they would not bring this many soldiers and the 2 tanks they had. Thinking about this, they just wasted precious fuel. After all, tanks were monsters at fuel consumption. "I also said that I already got the prisoners. Yet, you all came in full battle gear," Mark added. "I don't think there's any mistake with the words I said, right?" It seems like we misinterpreted it. We only heard that you had the prisoners with you. We thought that you needed rescue. Captain Morrison replied with a troubled expression. Mark did not say anything else. What he said could really be misinterpreted. It was more understandable since these people did not know about his abilities. Anyway, just go and loot this place out of everything you need and bring those guys back. Their stares are making me uncomfortable. Mark nonchalantly said, pointing at the prisoners that minded him more instead of the rescue that came for them. Captain Morrison left to order his soldiers, and they started to explore the whole place. Roan, on the other hand, stayed around Mark. Seems like what Felicia said about you fighting hundreds of infected alone is true. Roan said while looking at the hundreds of infected corpses around Mark. I don't think she's a liar, though, Mark said as he looked at a mutated corpse closely. My sister is not a liar, but she did lie. Roan shrugged. About her happily living after Jude left her. Sure enough, Felicia did not say everything she experienced in the past years to her family. She already brought them remorse and sadness when she left. Felicia did not want to give more. However, it seemed that Roan saw through her lies. Well, Mark had no reason to say what he knew and ignored what Roan had just said. Getting ignored like that did not sit well with Roan. However, he was not someone that would force an answer out of anyone, or else he could just ask Sandy and the others. After all, it seemed they also knew about his sister's story. He only mentioned it to Mark since he was the one to most likely not care about telling it or not. With a shrug of his shoulders, Roan decided to leave. That was when Mark spoke. Just ask your sister when she's ready to tell her story. Hearing that, Roan smiled. I guess, you're right. There, Roan left and joined the soldiers to explore the place. The soldiers were happy to see the prisoners that were rescued from the outlaws. Some of them were friends, and a few were family, after all. Of course, it was not an overall happy occasion. It was because the number of freed prisoners here was less than half of what their numbers were supposed to be. There was no need to ask what happened to the people not present. The people here could only pray that they received peace in the afterlife since the culprits were all dead. What made the soldiers feel happier, however, was the number of supplies and weapons that the outlaws amassed. They also had a lot of fuel barrels and even ammunition that who knows where it came from. And the food and water, there were 3 large storage units full. This place had more food and water than they had stored in school. While the soldiers scoured the place and loaded the loot into their vehicles, Mark continued to check the infected corpses since he had the chance to do so. The physical crystals did not only absorb mutations from the mutators but also from highly intelligent mutated infected. Unfortunately, these kinds of infected were rare to find. Except for the Queen type and the King type, Mark and May only encountered one once. It was the Leader type, bat-winged mutated infected back then in Bay City. This time, Mark was going around from corpse to corpse while holding a physical crystal, trying to see if the crystal would react or not. Unfortunately, despite a large number of infected corpses around him, the physical crystal did not even glow a little. It was almost sunset when they finished. There, everyone was eager to go home. Mark did not ride the vehicles when the soldiers finished. Instead, he flew home first, leaving them all behind. The base of the outlaws was just 2 kilometers away from the school. Of course, that was when flying in the air and not taking the route on the road. It did not take too long, and Mark arrived back at the school compound. It was quite dark already, and no one saw Mark as he landed on the roof of the building. There, he went straight to the room May was staying and saw her staying in bed as he instructed. She was sleeping. It seemed that she had fallen asleep while waiting for him. Mark went out a bit to change clothes. He was reeking with the smell of blood even if he was not splattered by it. After that, he sat on the chair beside May's bed, watching her. From time to time, she would frown. Maybe because of the pain on her back, or because she had an unpleasant dream. At those times, Mark held her hand tight and caressed her hair gently. That was when she would show a comfortable expression and a little smile on her sleeping face. Watching her like that, Mark could not help but smile. It was only beside May that he would feel at peace and comfortable. Soon, he did not realize that he had fallen asleep beside her bed. Asterisk 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 day 130 to 7:32 p.m. Arctic ice caps, Arctic region. A blizzard surged strongly, causing the ice-covered surroundings to become blurry. It was already night, and in the frozen Arctic, only ice could be seen. The blizzard only made the situation worse. Despite the strong blizzard and the cold temperature, however, silhouettes of creatures could be seen moving about. Bam! Loud sounds echoed, carried by the wind along with the sound of the blizzard. Roarrr. A gigantic silhouette could be seen roaring loudly after its enemy punched its face hard. And that enemy? It was a humanoid with 6 different wings. He was no other than Chimetras, and he was currently fighting against a gigantic evolved creature. The evolved creature was a giant octopus with white skin about 7 meters tall, not including the length of its tentacles. Its tentacles had suction caps layered with teeth while its head was covered with long fang-like thorns. TCH. Chimetras clicked his tongue as he avoided the monster's long and thick tentacles. He was having a hard time fighting this monster with just his pure strength. However, he was doing this because his other abilities were not effective on the creature. Instead, he was doing this to further accustom himself to his new body. After leaving Mark yesterday, Chimetras and Ilya immediately proceeded to find his creator's lab, the birthplace of the anti-god weapon with the form of a humanoid chimera. However, a very long time had passed. There were a lot of things that changed from the world they knew and the world as it was now. Finding something that existed 5,000 years ago was not easy. Both Chimetras and Ilya had no choice but to look for clues and seek for the possible locations they could think of. And now, they found themselves wandering the cold Arctic since one of the things they could remember about that place was that it was built somewhere very cold. It was not wrong since the cold temperature would help in preserving the dead specimens that Chimetras's creator got. Back then, refrigerators and freezers were still not invented. Aside from ice monsters and magic, there was no way to preserve things needed for experiments and studies. Furthermore, the gods that appeared on Earth back then all came from underdeveloped worlds. No, in a sense, their worlds were not underdeveloped. Instead, because of the existence of gods and magic, their worlds developed in a different way than Earth had. They had been searching for a day already, and it was hard. The gigantic monster that Chimetras was currently fighting was not the first one they encountered. There was also a giant ice worm and other evolved creatures. Fighting all these creatures was a hassle, especially to Chimetras that was still getting used to his new body. Master! Kill that faster, it's too cold out here. Ilya shouted as loud as she could while peeking out of the shelter they built to pass the blizzard in the night. All right, Chimetras shouted back, and his flying speed suddenly increased. Roarrr. Now that Chimetras was not holding back, the giant octopus could only roar in pain and fear as its body started to break from the attacks it received continuously. It did not take long, and the roars vanished. With a loud bang, the giant octopus crashed onto the sheet of cold snow and ice. Chimetras then came back, carrying a large piece of the octopus body with him. Is this thing really edible? Chimetras asked, poking at the flesh he carried. Octopus tastes good, you know, Ilya replied. It's a pity we didn't bring anything to cook it properly. We can only grill it over the fire. Ilya then used her dagger to cut the flesh into smaller pieces before grilling it over the fire. It's strange though how an octopus managed to come here. We are nowhere near the ocean, and the ice below us is thick. Ilya grumbled. It was not surprising for her to get fed up with the monsters they encountered. Most of them were, for some reason, appearing in front of Ilya and Chimetras as if they knew that they were coming. Chimetras picked up a piece that Ilya cut that had some skin on it. There he seemed to have remembered something. Ilya, look. Chimetras pointed at the strangely shaped spots on the white skin. Doesn't this look like similar to the creator's pet octopus back then? Since Chimetras said it, Ilya also remembered. but that one had black skin with white spots. Ilya said. I wonder. Chemetris sat down. Maybe that octopus managed to escape the laboratory, and that giant one was among its descendants? Ilya froze. That was highly possible. If that was the case, they were going in the right direction. Day 131 to 7:22 a.m. Audubon High School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. The night had passed without any noteworthy events aside from a few mutated infected that wandered outside the school. Last night, Mark fell asleep beside May's bed. It was after an hour and a half that Mark woke up as he felt that May was about to wake up. From there, dinner and other things happened, like using the crystals to absorb the mutations from the heads that Mark stored inside his ring. He wanted to do this as soon as possible. It was quite unpleasant to think that severed heads were rolling around the space inside his ring together with the other items. Time was not stopped inside the ring, either. If he left it alone for too long, these things would start to rot. That was why in the span of the night, he was busy collecting the mutator abilities from the heads of the outlaws and disposed of them using his black fire. There was the urge to use the crystals he wanted immediately, however, it was not the appropriate time to do so. It was better to do this stuff after they reached the safety of their home. Now, Mark was preparing for departure, and everyone coming with them was boarding the vehicle. And now, the members of the group were changed almost entirely. Why? It was because last night, Otis and the other survivors from Bally's casino pleaded Mark that they would stay behind. It was not that they did not want to go with Mark as per what they decided before. However, seeing Felicia reunited with her family made them jealous and hopeful. They wanted to stay behind and hope that they could find their families alive and reunite with them. Mark had no reason not to let them go. In fact, he quite expected this to happen. What he wanted from these people if he brought them to his base was loyalty. That was quite hard to achieve if they now had these kinds of thoughts. As Mark let them go, the only ones left were those that were sure that they had no family or relatives left. Sandy, Arnold, Ernst, and the 3 children were the only ones left in the group along with Felicia and her family of 5. There was also Hannah, the unconscious Morgan, the female cultivator, and the queen type, with the Empress spider latched on her head. While Otis decided to stay, he still served as their driver for the past days. Thus, Mark decided to give him a crystal that he got from one of the outlaws. He also gave one to Captain Morrison as he would need it to protect the people in this settlement. The two were quite confused as to why Mark was giving them strange jewelry in private. Mark did not bother to explain too much and just said that they needed to swallow the crystals if they wanted to get stronger. Of course, not at the time that he gave them the crystals but after their group left. Aside from everyone, there was also a new girl. Her name was Mariella Hopkins, and she was following Roan. Mark had no problems with Mariella joining in, but to say, Roan and Felicia were in kind of similar situation. They definitely were siblings. After all, Roan and Mariella were not in any romantic relationship, even though they liked each other. It was the same with Felicia and Morgan. Despite his young-looking appearance, Roan was already in his early 30s, yet, he was single. It was quite surprising since having a good appearance run well in the blood of their family. There must have been dozens of women that would fall in love with him at first sight. However, because of the missing Felicia, Roan became focused on supporting his family instead of having his own. Now that Felicia returned, he might be able to start with the other aspects of his life. On the other hand, with Otis gone, Roan replaced him as the driver. Arnold could also drive, but it was a better decision to let Roan, who had better reflexes, to drive the vehicle instead. Of course, if the need came, the two would switch. There was also a problem that popped out, though. It was quite expected for Mark, and he was not troubled. However, Roan was rather displeased with it. After all, the problem was Elise. And the problem with her was, she was sticking around Mark like a shy little sister. Even now that they were about to leave, Elise was behind Mark, grasping the hem of his shirt, and to say, it should be Roan's position. It was not surprising, though. Elise's memories went back to the time that she was pretty much neglected by everyone. Then, she woke up not remembering what happened to the world. It was like she was transported to an Earth she never knew. But then, Mark came to calm her. And like when she was with Else, the times she could not remember anymore, Elise could not hear the annoying voices when she was around Mark or May. It made her comfortable to stay around the two. She even started calling them elder brother and elder sister. That made both Roan and Felicia a bit jealous. And sometimes when Elise was like this, Mark would smirk at Roan, annoying the guy to the bones. Since the preparations were done early, it did not take too long before they left. Not everyone was okay with Mark leaving the school indefinitely. The people that were saved from the outlaws wanted to follow Mark like worshippers. Of course, Mark did not want it. And even if they followed, they would not be of use because of their emaciated bodies. It was better if they stayed behind. Nevertheless, all the others here in the school were confused. They could not understand why these people were behaving like that towards Mark. As the gates were opened, the black, armored vehicle rushed out. The freed prisoners waved to their savior while the soldiers saluted for the things that Mark did for them, especially getting rid of the outlaws. The vehicle drove out of sight, leaving those things behind. Asterisk 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 inside the vehicle, Mark was skimming through the notes that he asked Captain Morrison. It contained what they knew about Philadelphia after the outbreak. It was not that much and was just ragged information that could fit 3 pages of a small notebook while loosely written. However, it contained possible routes and dangers that they could possibly encounter. From Audubon, they had 2 routes they could take to enter Philadelphia. The first was Walt Whitman Bridge that was a bit closer, while the other was the famous Benjamin Franklin Bridge that was still some ways to the north. However, both had pros and cons if one wanted to travel through any of these bridges. The closer and smaller one of the two, the Walt Whitman Bridge, was barricaded by the armed forces of both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Of course, it was already abandoned by the military. Still, going through it would become a hassle because anyone that wanted to pass through the bridge needed to remove the barricades out of the way first. There was also one thing. The abandoned military outpost and barricades on the bridge seemed to have been occupied by an armed group. Since Captain Morrison and his soldiers lacked the equipment to survey the bridge before without getting caught, they refrained from doing it. Aside from those, however, the route using Walt Whitman Bridge should be safer in the long run. It was because the road connected to it, the Schuylkill Expressway, was a long stretch of road almost entirely isolated away from residential areas using concrete barriers, fences, and flyovers. The number of infected they would likely encounter was smaller. The expressway also travels outside South Philadelphia, away from the center of the city. On the other hand, Benjamin Franklin Bridge was also subjected to road blockade by the military of both states. However, the barricades had already fallen before it was finished and it is abandoned first compared to the other bridge. The main reason for this was because the bridge led to the center of Philadelphia. Being the main bridge in the city, most people tried to cross it when the outbreak came. And so, the infected followed the evacuation causing its collapse. That was also where the main problem with this route. It would go through the center of the city, where most of the infected resided. That area was pretty much an uncharted land for the survivors. The route was filled with residential buildings, business establishments, markets, and parks. In short, it was a very dangerous route. Just Atlantic City that could not even compare to a fourth of Philadelphia had a queen type. It might be safe to assume that there could be 1 or 2 in this place. So, boss, what route will we go? Roan asked, turning his head towards Mark, who was sitting behind. He started calling Mark boss not out of respect but spite. It was quite childish of him, so Mark did not bother to correct it. Go to Benjamin Franklin Bridge. We're going across the city. Mark smiled. That decision made Abraham and Roan a bit worried. It was a dangerous route, after all. On the other hand, Felicia and the others that knew Mark first could only sigh. They started to have a grasp of Mark's personality. It was expected for him to choose the more dangerous route. Don't misunderstand me, Mark spoke as he opened the map application on his phone. Using the infected as a gauge, The south route should not be any less dangerous compared to the other. Do you know something notable close that route? It is a very large facility that is directly tied to the outbreak. That question made the people inside the vehicle think. However, none of them were too familiar with Philadelphia, well aside from Abraham, it seemed. Are you talking about Philadelphia International Airport? Abraham asked. To that answer, everyone here understood what Mark was talking about. Airports were directly tied to the outbreak. It was because it all started when the airplanes started crashing, containing its mutated passengers. And near airports, more of these aircraft could possibly crash. Compared to the infected that mutated in the middle of the outbreak, the infected that came from those crashed aircraft were far more threatening. 4 months after the outbreak started, the infected grew in strength as they mutated. Then what about the mutated infected from those crashed aircraft? They could only shiver as they thought about it. The center of the city might be filled with infected. In the least, encountering an infected that had the strength to flatten an army was far lower. Is there anything we should take note of when we enter Philadelphia? Roan asked another question. He was the one driving, and it was better if he knew what to watch out for on the road. Mark flipped the notes to the last page. There was a list of early mutation types that the military encountered before the radio communications failed. And to say, while there was the same kind of mutations that Mark encountered earlier in the outbreak, there were quite many kinds of infected that he had not heard of. There's nothing much to take note of, Mark replied. Most of it is just infected. We can deal with them on the way without problems. Hearing those confident words, everyone smiled. In the least, everyone here could feel assured in this travel. Almost everyone here already knew how strong Mark and May were. Roan and the others here were also mutators. If it was any other group, this kind of atmosphere would not appear at all and everyone would travel with their minds on the edge. Day 131 to 10:15 a.m. Benjamin Franklin Bridge Plaza, North-South Freeway, Camden City, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Almost 3 hours after Mark's group left Audubon High School, they finally arrived at the entrance of Benjamin Franklin Bridge. Before the outbreak, the distance they had just covered measured just around 22 minutes or 30 minutes if there was heavy traffic. Even though they already expected the travel to be much longer than expected, it was still longer than that expectation. It was the case where expecting the unexpected ruled over. There was quite a number of infected roaming the freeway, and by saying quite, it was actually around several hundred. Mark's group had to proceed with caution, and he and the others had to fight along the way, slowing their speed even more. Not to mention the increasing number of abandoned cars that were left, blocking most of the road. Nevertheless, they were still considered lucky after encountering this number of infected. Why, boss, what are you looking at? Felicia asked as she saw Mark peering over the safety fences of the bridge. Since he did not answer, she also approached to see what he was looking at. There, she froze. They started to gather because of the sound from the car. Mark said as he watched the thousands of infected that started to go out of the buildings they were confined in, crashing the windows, falling from higher floors, and breaking weaker walls. There was definitely a lot of infected. It was not surprising considering that this area around this side of the Benjamin Franklin Bridge had a lot of facilities like university campuses, libraries, museums, theater, galleries, business offices, and even a few hospitals. These infected had been lying dormant here since the area had long been deserted by humans. Even survivors did not exist in this place. Without anything to attract their attention, they had only been shambling around almost everywhere. A lot of them got stuck inside buildings in the process. Now, however, the sound from the vehicle Mark's group had attracted these infected and caused them to force themselves out of their confinement. Fortunately, Mark's group had already made it past the area of the freeway that was accessible from the ground and was now traversing the bridge. If not, it would be a different story. Fortunately, real life isn't programmed like video games, Mark murmured. If not, AI pathing will make all these infected run around the road and come chasing us from there. Hearing that, Felicia shivered at the thought. In video games, the enemies were programmed to chase after the players. allowing the AI pathing to find the right route to kill their target. Even if the way around was very far from the player, as long as the AI could reach it, the enemy would follow that path. Fortunately, it was not the case, and now, since the infected below could only hear the sound of the vehicle and not see it, they started to cluster below the bridge, not knowing where to go. "Boss! Let's eat!" Roan shouted from outside the vehicle as the food had been prepared. They were currently having an early lunch. It was something Mark decided before they go crossing the bridge and enter Philadelphia. Everyone agreed to it since they knew his reasons for suggesting this. After they crossed the bridge and enter Philadelphia, it would be questionable if they would have any time to take a break. Now that they were in a safer area, it was better to take advantage of this chance. Of course, eating here in an open area, even if it was already above ground, it was not entirely safe. That was why it was decided that everyone would take turns eating. While the first group ate, the other group would keep the dangers at bay and vice versa. Being called back, Mark sat beside May as the cooked food was delivered to them. There was a bit of childish scuffle, though. Elise wanted to sit beside on the other side of Mark. However, the seat was already occupied by the queen type. Because of that, Elise had no choice but to sit beside May instead. That scene made everyone watching almost burst out into laughter. Abraham and his wife were still sad that Elise lost her memories. However, seeing her being lively like this was better than her gloomy self in the past. As for the queen type, everyone except Mark, May, and Elise, who had no idea about the queen type, was still wary of her. It was still kind of odd that they were sharing the same food with an infected, after all. However, that gap was loosening, especially when they saw how the queen type was trying hard on how to learn to use a spoon. The splatter of food on her face as she failed and how she let Mark and May wipe her dirty face without resisting. The way she stared at her food that she could not eat properly and the way she enjoyed the food as if it was the best thing in the world. It gave everyone the thought that the queen type was trying her best to become human again. Everyone merrily ate, except for one person. She ate timidly, wishing that no one bother or notice her. It was no other than Feng Jiruo, the female cultivator that Mark captured. "Are you all right?" Someone suddenly asked Feng Jiruo, making her flinch. When she turned her head, a woman was smiling at her. It was no other than the woman named Mariella. Being new to the group, Mariella was still in the process of knowing almost everyone. Thus, she decided to greet Feng Jiruo, who was very quiet. Okay. And here was where the problem lay. Feng Jiruo was not only keeping it quiet because she wanted to. One of the reasons was that Feng Jiruo's English vocabulary was very shallow. It was not like she could not converse, but she was very awkward sounding, and her English sentences were not constructed properly. And as she was not used to speaking English, there were times that Chinese words could come out of her mouth instead, making it even more awkward for her. It was not surprising, though. Although Feng Jiruo was a cultivator, it did not mean that she needed to learn other languages without reason. Even the trip here in America was not something she wanted to do. In that group that the elder led, Feng Jiruo was not among the real members. It was more accurate to say that she was nothing but a tag along to fill in numbers. Mariella found it hard to respond after hearing Feng Jiruo's awkward and broken reply. Everyone that was eating saw what happened. They all wanted to fix the atmosphere, but it was kinda hard if Feng Jiruo was not able to understand it. Mark turned at May and nudged her. Knowing what he wanted, May nodded. "Did the food not suit your taste?" May started to speak to Feng Jiruo using a language that the others could not understand. This made them feel a bit strange since they could not understand a single word that she said, and the whole sentence sounded like a single long word. To Feng Jiruo, however, it felt like that she saw the light in the darkness, since when she woke up after being brought back by Mark, she spent time alone without anyone to talk to. After spending a whole day and night like that, it was not wrong to say that she started to feel lonely. And now, she learned that the beautiful girl in front of her can speak her language, Mandarin, fluently. Come to think of it, May's appearance had qualities similar to a Chinese woman. No, it tastes good. I'm sorry if I can't speak English properly. I made things feel awkward. Feng Jiruo bowed in apology. Then, there's nothing to worry about. If you need anything, just tell me. Just finish the food quickly since we still need to leave as soon as possible. Mei replied with a little smile. Yes, thank you. Feng Jiruo bowed once more and continued eating her food. This time, however, she was livelier. Seeing that things returned to normal, Mariella sighed in relief. She just wanted to greet the timid girl. Who would have thought that it would turn into an awkward situation? On the other hand, she looked at Mei in a new light. To be able to speak several languages, it was an amazing feat for many people, after all. The others also looked at Mei with a similar expression. It made her quite uncomfortable, though. After an exchange of lookouts, they finished eating soon after and left. Traversing this side of the bridge was easy as there were lesser vehicles that blocked the road. They reached the fallen military outpost at the center of the bridge. As Captain Morrison's notes had described it, the outpost did not even manage to finish barricading the bridge before it was abandoned. Tall concrete barriers were set up to block the bridge. The layout of the outpost indicated that the military only wanted to keep a passage that would allow vehicles to pass through one at a time. It is reasonable since they would need to check the cars one by one and not let any infected pass. Shing. Mark's Slicer beheaded an infected as he jumped out of the vehicle. He looked around with Arnold and Ernst, checking the place. After all, this was a military outpost. Even though it was already abandoned, there might still be some usable military equipment that was left lying around. On the other hand, the vehicle continued to press on, as it paved the way between the abandoned cars blocking the path. After seeing the place, it was definitely abandoned in a hurry. The welding equipment to affix the barbed wires and the crane trucks used to arrange the tall concrete barricades were left in messy positions. The military vehicles were also left, though only a few in number. Looks like no one has been here since the outbreak started, Ernst deduced, seeing how everything was left, evenly covered in dust. The only things different were the places on the floor where the infected likely stepped it while randomly wandering around. It's not surprising, Arnold replied, pointing his thumb at Mark. Only our boss there had the guts to go through places like this. Mark heard that but had no reason to refute it. Besides, he could not, even if he wanted to. It was true, after all. The three looked around the outpost as fast as possible. Unfortunately, aside from construction equipment, the things that were commonly seen in places like this, nothing else was noteworthy. And since the outpost was abandoned before it was finished, weapon and supply storages were also non-existent. The only thing they managed to find and take back were the very few guns that were left lying on the floor to accumulate dust and rust. There were some infected soldiers wearing armor roaming around. Although the bulletproof armors they wore would interest common survivors, it barely held anything in Mark's eyes. Furthermore, the members of his group right now were not that desperate to wear clothes and defensive equipment from these infected soldiers. Still, Mark took 2 sets of armor and military clothes left in the outpost and stored it in his ring. It was just for the sake of collection and nothing else. Soon, they left the outpost, passing through the border between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Pushing through the traffic left on the remaining part of the bridge, they almost reached the exit of Benjamin Franklin Bridge. From their current position, they could already see the bolt of lightning. It was a tall, notable landmark, an artwork built facing the bridge. Soon, welcomed by a large number of infected, they exited the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and entered the city of Philadelphia. *******, Day 131 to 12:02 p.m. Rooftop, United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. At the rooftop of the tall, rust-colored building of the Court of Appeals, a silhouette of a man stood. He watched over a black vehicle that exited the Benjamin Franklin Bridge in the distance. Interesting. The man murmured. It's been a long time since the last time a human stepped into my territory. Right, Vegas. The man asked behind him where a 2-meter-tall hawk with yellow eyes and blood-red feathers stood. Day 131 to 1:11 p.m. Benjamin Franklin Bridge exit, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. Quick! Turn right! Mark shouted at Roan as they saw the vast horde of infected not far from the exit of the bridge. It was like there was an ongoing festival. The number of infected in that horde was more than half of the number of infected they encountered along the road these past few days of travel. It was a number far greater than the number of infected stuck on the other side of the bridge. Mark was not afraid of that number. Using the crystals, he could wipe them all with a bit of effort. Of course, they needed to get the vehicle out of the way first. If Mark fought the infected now, the road they needed to enter would be blocked by the infected, making the vehicle stuck. And if that happened and the battle was already ongoing, there would be a very high chance that they would alert the other infected in the near vicinity inside the city. That was why they needed to strike first. As Mark commanded, Roan steered the wheel, driving the vehicle towards the overpass to the right. There were also infected blocking the way, but at least, it was still a number that the car could handle and mow down. Splat! The ram in front of the vehicle was splattered with fresh blood. The force from the collision shook the car a bit. Roan also had to use the wiper as the windshield was also stained with blood. "I knew that this is a crazy idea," Ernst complained with all his heart while looking at the infected behind the vehicle. Usually, Ernst would get refuted for shouting like that. This time, however, everyone agreed with him. That number of infected was sure a lot to be gathered in one place. VVRRRROMM. The engine roared as Roan drove the vehicle as fast as possible to get away from the potential danger. With that speed, they reached the main road going through the center city, Vine Street. Reaching the Vine Street after traveling for about 500 meters away from the bridge, however. "Huh?" Roan voiced out in surprise as he stepped on the brakes by reflex. The sudden stop of the vehicle caused everyone inside to rattle. Roan had good reflexes, although this time, it caused almost everyone to get hurt. Luckily, everyone had their seatbelts on. Or else, someone would already have a painful bump on their head. "Roan! What are you doing?" Felicia shouted. It seemed even with the seatbelts on, she felt dizzy from the sudden stop. Not only her, their parents, Abraham and Candace, even the 3 children, felt the same. However, no reply was heard from Roan, who was staring in front. Mariella, who sat on the front passenger seat, was the same. Curious and because of the urgency of the infected chasing behind, Arnold, that sat on the 3rd row, stood up slightly to see the front. Then, seeing the situation in front of the car, Arnold called out to Roan. "Dude, Roan, why did you stop? There's nothing in front." But then, he froze. That was the issue and why Roan stopped. Abandoned vehicles covered the majority of the road. Old trash and plastic could be seen getting blown away by the wind. The overgrown grass that started to grow was also present. All of the things left by the outbreak were present. Well, except for one thing that should be present, but none could be seen. There was not a single infected on the road in front of them. It was even though there was a lot when they exited the bridge. Did we suddenly get transported somewhere else? Sandy could not help but voice that question because of the absurdity of the scene before them. Remembering the horde by the bridge, everyone looked behind. "Huh? There's no one chasing us?" Ernst said as he saw the empty overpass behind them. "It was strange. Very strange. Don't move the car yet. I'll check," Mark said as he left his seat. Jumping out of the vehicle, he spread his wings and flew up. The first thing Mark did was to look towards the way they took in a rush. He noticed that the road they traversed just now gave them a limited view of the surroundings. It was because of the walls it had and the winding roads that go over it. While flying above, it was even hard to see the entirety of the road they covered so far after entering Philadelphia. When his eyes reached the bridge, Mark was quite surprised. The infected they saw before were still there. All of the infected were all wandering around as if Mark's group never passed by. However, in Mark's eyes, although the infected were moving like natural, they were already blocking the bridge, preventing Mark's group from going back. Mark suddenly had a bad feeling about this. Coup week. Suddenly, Mark heard the loud screech of a bird. He immediately turned his head towards the direction that the screech came from. There, he saw a large hawk rushing towards him. A hawk with a 2-meter body and a wingspan of more than 3 meters. It was not wrong to say that it was a small airplane that was rushing towards Mark. Its yellow eyes were glistering despite the sunlight, and its blood-red feathers were in contrast with the blue sky. Mark immediately readied the slicer and divider. Using his blood scythe was not suitable for an encounter like this. Why? As it entered Mark's area of detection, he could not feel anything. As it flew closer, it became even more apparent. A head that barely had skin and feathers, a hole on its stomach that made its guts spill out, and one of its eyes dangled out of its socket. Without a single doubt, it was a mutated infected hawk. With how fast the hawk flew, it reached Mark in no time. It swept its claws towards him. Mark stopped flapping his wings, purposely losing altitude to evade the claws. With a spin of his body, Mark slashed towards the wings of the hawk as it passed above him. However, the slash hit nothing as the hawk spun its body away, evading Mark's attack entirely. Intelligent infected? Mark could not help but blurt out. However, Mark shook his head immediately. There was already a lot of infected exhibiting intelligence. However, almost all of them only had enough intelligence to avoid danger. Furthermore, the way they evade danger, like deadly attacks, was rough. They would either jump back really far or run away far from the reach of the attack. Those infected were still different from the bat-winged, leader type, that Mark and May encountered before. This hawk, however, evaded his slash with minimum and efficient movements. There was a problem, though. Mark could not feel any intelligence coming from the hawk at all. It was not a kind of infected that should be capable of such movements. One thing immediately entered Mark's mind. The hawk was being controlled. After evading his slash, the hawk flew past Mark and took a big turn. It gave Mark the chance to skim past the surroundings to see if he could find the one controlling it. But there, Mark's eyes grew wide. Mark did not notice earlier since he focused his eyes towards the exit of the bridge. Now that he looked around, it was not that the infected were missing. All of the infected, no matter what size or shape, they were all hidden. The infected all hid away from the main road in front of the vehicle. Since some of the mutated infected were too large, they were poorly hidden behind the buildings beside the road. However, if it was on the ground level, none of them could be seen like this. Well, **T. Mark cursed as he ignored the hawk and flew back to the vehicle as fast as he could. Back to the bridge. Mark immediately shouted to Roan in the utmost urgency. Seeing his serene expression, Roan did not ask any question and stepped on the gas pedal and turned the vehicle around as fast as he could. Mark did not ride the vehicle and jumped onto the roof. He still needed to clear the way when they reached the bridge. VRRROOMMM. The vehicle roared as it accelerated. But then, is it just me, or the ground is shaking? Mariella asked. Of course, she was not the only one that felt it. However, none of them knew what was going on. Holy FCK. Until Roan cursed it out of his lungs and stopped the vehicle in a hurry, shaking everyone violently once more. This was the second time it happened. They should have been angry because of this. Nevertheless, not this time. Everyone all understood why Roan stepped on the brakes. Who knows where it came from? Maybe from the buildings beside the bridge, or somewhere that was hard to see. The only thing that everyone knew was that the way back was blocked. It was blocked by a 5-meter-tall humanoid giant that rushed towards the middle of the road. Its thick and fat body alone covered the span of 4 out of 6 lanes that the overpass had. Rushing back and driving through the empty lane beside the giant? Surely you jest. A single kick from this guy would send the vehicle flying for several dozen meters. At the roof, Mark started to get ready. He could at least lure or push the giant out of the way. With red light glowing on his veins, Mark flapped his wings. He immediately appeared in front of the giant's face, giving it a kick from both his feet. Bam! The surroundings shook from the collision. However, Mark could only frown as he failed to do what he wanted. The fat giant barely moved from its spot. Not only its thick skin managed to resist Mark's kick, but its body was too heavy to be pushed by the attack. Mark wanted to use the crystals to instantly drill a hole out of the giant's head. However, if he was to do that, the giant would fall in the middle of the road, likely to block the entire road they wanted to take. "Hey, bastard! Over here!" Mark shouted, trying to get the attention of the giant. However, it was not moving at all. This guy is being controlled too, Mark deduced. But to say, Mark started to understand what was happening. The center city, or probably, even the entire Philadelphia, was under the control of someone. Removing the infected out of the main road, if it was not an ambush, it should be an invitation. Blocking their path to return. It indicated that the one controlling the infected did not want Mark and the others to leave. Mark looked at the sky. The infected hawk was still there circling at them. However, not only the hawk. The giant made no threatening movement at all. It indicated that as long as they did not try to leave, these two would not attack at all. "Boss! Just what is happening?" Roan opened the side window and shouted at Mark. As the giant did not make any movement, Mark calmed himself down. He returned to the stopped vehicle. "We are being invited to enter the city," Mark voiced out, making everyone surprised. "Drive, follow the main road carefully," Mark ordered Roan, and the latter had no choice but to follow. With that, they arrived at the main road once more. It was still devoid of infected from this angle. When they reached the first intersection, however, they could see that a large number of infected roamed the roads that branched off the main one. It felt like they did not want them to go through there. The person or people controlling the infected should be watching them. That was what Mark thought. In this case, Mark was interested to know what the other party wanted or even just what kind of creatures they were. With a smile, Mark could not help but anticipate this interesting scenario. Day 131 to 1:19 p.m. Vine Street, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. Vine Street that was devoid of the infected. It felt somehow safe and dangerous at the same time. It was the main stretch of road going through almost the entire center of the center city, from east to west. It connected the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and the Logan Square near the exit on the west side of Center City. Vine Street was a vast stretch of road, consisting of 4 car lanes, both eastbound and westbound. However, that was not all. In between, separating the 4 lanes from the other, was an expressway, going through a lower elevation, tunneling through the intersections. The distance between the sidewalk on the north side and the south side was about 60 meters. That was how wide this street was. It was a place bustling with activity, especially during the rush hours. It was the center of Philadelphia, after all. Traveling across this road and looking at the side, all one could see were high-rise buildings and business establishments. Nevertheless, it was a beautiful city filled with life, culture, and opportunities. 4 months after Mutagen invaded Earth, it became a dead stretch of a road, devoid of humans. Abandoned cars littered the majority of the road, mostly arranged to face a specific direction. There, metal fences were set up, as if it was intended to regulate the number of vehicles to pass through. It was now no wonder why Benjamin Franklin Bridge was not that crowded with abandoned vehicles. It was because the remaining ones were left stuck in this street. Sitting on the roof of the vehicle, Mark observed the surroundings cautiously, and to say, he might really be right about his assumption. For some reason, their group was being invited into the city. Every time they passed by an intersection, they would see the horde that blocked it. The weaker infected would not pay attention to Mark's group, as if they did not notice the moving and noisy vehicle. On the other hand, the stronger mutated infected would creepily follow Mark's car with their malevolent-looking eyes. But of course, like the weaker ones, none of them would do anything more than stare. What was the enemy? A strong human? A paranormal creature? No, the being that was most likely to be able to do this kind of thing was either a king type or a queen type. I guess it's better to lump the two in a single category instead. We should call them the monarch types. Mark murmured. Roan drove the vehicle carefully. Their movement was slow since the whole stretch of road was filled with abandoned cars and wreckage. If not for the current event that was happening, they might have chosen another road to pass through instead. Creak. The vehicle shook, and the creaking sounds echoed every time it pushed aside the abandoned cars blocking the way. But then, the vehicle suddenly stopped. Mark immediately jumped down. He also felt what was wrong, and he opened the door. There, sitting on the seat beside his, the queen type, was panicking. She was staring at Mark with anxiety and trepidation. She was chained, so she could not move from her position. If she was not, she might have jumped toward Mark already. Gerger, what's wrong with her? May asked as she noticed the stare that the queen type gave Mark. I don't know. Let me check first. Mark replied as he hurried back into his seat. Slowly, he removed her chains. It was because the chains seemed to be affecting what she was feeling right now. The moment she was freed from the chain, however, she rushed at Mark to everyone's surprise. When they thought that she wanted to attack Mark and was about to interfere, they were dumbfounded. The queen type was hugging Mark intensely while shivering. Her helpless appearance somehow made them pity her. Even May, who behaved jealously against the queen type, did not say anything. What is wrong? Mark asked the queen type, although she was not a talkative kind, but she could understand some words and speak. It was better to ask her what was happening. Someone calls. Strong. Don't want to go. The queen type was desperate. It was not wrong that at first, she only saw Mark as a candidate for mating and the other humans as food. Spending time with this group, however, although she still had some of the urges that the infected had, she started to change. She wanted to try what it was like to become human. But now, someone was calling her to return to the side of the infected. She did not want to. Mark patted the queen type's head that was burrowed into his chest. It was kinda hard to do with the Empress spider on the way, though. With that, the queen type started to calm down, but then she froze with her eyes dilated. Splat. Blood splattered inside the vehicle, causing everyone to panic. That blood made Elise scared, and her mind started to become chaotic once more. May immediately held onto her, suppressing her negative energy that began to riot once more. Mark, on the other hand, grabbed the cause of this mess. On his hand, he clutched on a spider that was larger than his fist. It was the Empress spider. Despite sharing the same body, the queen type and Empress spider were still two different entities. The queen type wanted to resist the voice that was calling unto her. On the other hand, the Empress spider, that had lesser intelligence and consciousness, decided to follow it. With the conflicting thoughts between the parasite and the host, the parasite that could not control its host anymore decided to leave. As the Empress spider removed its legs that were drilled into the queen type's head, the latter's blood splattered around. Catching the Empress spider that jumped off, Mark immediately restrained it with his blood metal. Putting the resisting spider aside, Mark started to tend to the queen type that was bleeding. There was no way for him to cure the wounds instantly, but he could at least stop the blood from flowing out. After the Empress spider left her head, the queen type felt weak and slumped on Mark's arms. Mark immediately took out a regeneration medicine from his space, making her drink it. Mark already found an interesting infected that wanted to return being a human. He would not let her die. He wanted to see how far she could go. Now that the queen type was separated from her parasite, there was now another reason to save her. The regeneration medicine, sure, was miraculous. The holes on the queen type's head was a very severe wound. However, with 2 vials of it, the injury started to heal. As the wounds closed, Mark slowly removed the blood metal he used to stop the bleeding. Leaving it plugging the holes as it healed would not be a good idea. Several minutes passed, and the queen type was healed of her wounds. However, she was weakened and fell unconscious. On the other hand, the Empress spider was still struggling in its restraints. Going wild was even an understatement to its current behavior. Mark also had to calm Elise after what happened. It was the first time she was this close to blood after she lost her memories. After all, her panic this time was understandable. Still, what the adults here were more worried about was how the three children did not even react to the sight of blood. It would be fine if they felt scared, but they just looked at it as if it was nothing. This is quite a blessing in disguise, isn't it? Mark smiled. One of the problems he had before was how to separate these two. He tried to do that before, but the Empress spider would not budge from its position. Mark did not try to force it off as it might leave implications. Now, the Empress spider, left on its own, and aside from the wounds on her head and feeling weakened, the Queen type seemed to be all right. The smell of blood inside the vehicle was quite unpleasant. However, Mark and the others did not have time to clean it right now. Urging Roan to move on, they continued to travel through this barren road. Nevertheless, they noticed the change in the infected that they could see at the intersections. All of them, weak or not, stared at the vehicle with bloodshot eyes. Their faces reflected the anger that the one controlling them was feeling. After making sure that the Empress spider could not escape his small cage, Mark returned to the roof of the vehicle to keep guard. Mark felt better. The Queen type was loyal to his group, and she was freed from the urges of the Empress spider. Maybe this time, the Queen type would stop seeing him as a candidate for mating. It was an urge mainly from the Empress spider, after all. More than that, seeing the warped faces of the infected was uplifting. Maybe it was just Mark's imagination, but he could see the warped face of a suitor rejected by the woman he was interested in from those faces. Without a doubt, the danger they were currently facing was from a monarch type. A king type, to be exact. Then, Mark felt a strong presence that entered his detection area. "Found you," Mark murmured as his glaring eyes turned towards the buildings on the south side of Vine Street. How would he not notice? As they passed by another intersection, he saw a humanoid silhouette jump from the top of a building labeled as Hahnemann University Hospital towards the top floor of a garage parking building on the other side of the street. This guy was insanely powerful. This guy just leapt over a 60-meter distance without a sweat. While Mark watched that silhouette, he was sure that the king type was also watching him. Mark could feel the king type's glare as if it was boring a hole on his body. That intense stare, it was itching for a fight as it was filled with anger and denial. Mark could not understand why this king type invited them instead of attacking directly. It was because of the queen type, without a doubt. Maybe it was not the only reason. However, it was the largest factor that turned the entire situation into a more hostile environment. After all, the queen type rejected the king type to the point of injuring herself. For the infected, that was pathologically violent. It was already amazing that the king type was still able to hold back the urge to attack. In any case, the actual reasons would be revealed soon. Mark only needed to wait a bit more. Their travel across this road littered with cars and debris was quite long. They wanted to hurry, but it was impossible without turning everything into an accident. Carefully and cautiously, Roan had to maneuver the vehicle a lot to find a better route to go to. Everyone was on edge. It was not surprising since the intense glare and killing intent of the king type was focused on the vehicle. Only Mark could see the king type watching atop the buildings, after all. Still, Mark felt unpleasant how the king type was above, as if he was looking down on his group, both literally and ideologically. Soon, they reached the part where even the road in front was blocked by the infected. They had no choice but to change directions, being led away by the infected. And there, they reached the Logan Square. A wide patch of land with several parks separated by the roads intersecting at the circle in its center. It was a good place to relax when one had the time to idle around. However, Mark could not help but frown. Everyone inside the vehicle felt shivers. The place did not look like a park anymore but a slaughter ground. Day 131 to 1:23 p.m. Logan Square, Franklintown, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. Logan Square. It was the vibrant mix of historic buildings, swanky high-rises, and museums sharing verdant parklands as described. A popular attraction in the middle of the busy city. Its parks had been a place made, intending to please the eyes of anyone that could see it. But what color should a park have? Children's parks had bright colors to attract children and stir their imagination. Cultural parks had a simple, nevertheless, classic color, displaying traces of history. Leisure parks had vibrant colors pleasing to the eyes, helping everyone that stopped by to have a sense of relaxation. Business parks had a monotone, but professional-looking colors. In any way, parks were made for people in the community around it to enjoy. In front of Mark and his group, however, there was no trace of any of these colors. Maybe there were still other colors left, however, all that they could see was the color red and black. To be exact, the color of dried blood that painted almost the entirety of Logan Square. Roan could not help but slow down the vehicle. Anyone in the current situation would do so. At the roof of the vehicle, Mark frowned. The grass that covered most of the park was all dead together with the trees and the bushes. All was left was dried trunks and branches that still managed to remain. Dangling on the branches of the trees were skulls and severed rotting heads. Dumped at the side were mangled, half-eaten, rotting bodies. The water in the broken fountain at the center of the traffic circle was replaced with thick muddy blood. "It is a slaughter park," Mark murmured as he covered his nose. He had no problems with the smell of blood. However, the nasty stench of hundreds of rotting bodies was unbearable. Not only Mark but everyone inside the vehicle could feel their stomachs churning. The smell of death was the foulest stench that a human could smell in their whole lives, after all. Still, Mark and his group had no time to pay attention to the dead bodies or the rotting stench. Rather than that, they should focus on the person sitting in front of the blood-covered fountain. Furthermore, he was not alone. The guy was with his entourage. Of course, it was no other than the king type that Mark saw jumping from building to building. And his entourage. They were all mutated infected that was capable of trampling over a small military-controlled settlement alone. There were 7 of them present, standing around the fountain of blood with their king at the center. The first was a woman. She was rather eye-catching because of her layered-looking slimy pinkish skin. Her fingers were moving in a way like it had no bones at all. No matter how one looked at her, she looked like a humanoid earthworm. The second was a child. Or maybe not. He had the body of a 10-year-old, however, he had wrinkled skin and a face that was covered with his blood-covered beard. That appearance was highly contrasting with his clothes and size. The third was another woman. Maybe she was a high school student as she was still wearing her uniform. What was noticeable about her was the 2 blades that protruded on both her arms. She also had blade-like claws and fangs. The fourth was a baby. If an infant about the size of a bull could still be called a baby, then it was correct. It crawled on its 4s with all the baby fats on its body jiggling as its body swayed. The fifth was a middle-aged man. Maybe he was not, however, it was hard to tell because of his fur-covered body. The sixth was a lizard. It was not a crocodile but had the size of one. Its metal-like scales told everyone that it was something impenetrable by bullets. Lastly, the 7th was the hawk that intercepted Mark earlier. Mark started at the infected king. He seemed to be in his early 20s. He had long blonde hair that reached his shoulders. Without a doubt, this guy was highly intelligent. The king was wearing some neat clothes, although as an infected, he had no fashion sense at all. No, it was more like he tried to clothe himself but failed miserably. He was wearing a basketball jersey over an unbuttoned polo while wearing cargo shorts below and a pair of bedroom slippers. Although he was emitting a dangerous aura around him, his appearance was nothing but a joke. Of course, no one would be able to laugh even if that was the case. The murderous intent from the infected king's eyes was enough to make a person mute. Slowly, the vehicle came to a stop. Roan had no choice. The whole Logan Square was already surrounded. "Just how many are there?" Ernst peered through the windows and asked. Sure enough, he was already scared. No sane person would be able to stay calm in this situation where their death felt imminent. Not only Ernst, but the others were also the same, especially Elise and her parents. It was the very first time they had been in such a situation, after all. At least, the survivors from Atlantic City already felt how it was to be in an event like this. There, Mark jumped off from the roof, standing between the fountain and the vehicle. Then, there was silence. Mark and the infected king was having a staring contest. No, the battle already started. The two were trying to assess each other's strengths. Inside the vehicle. Get ready for battle. May suddenly spoke in a calm tone. Everyone looked at her. They did not know how she was able to stay calm in a situation like this. Roan sighed. It was not like they had any other choice. They might really go down in his place. In the least, they should fight. Don't worry, May added. Gerger will do most of the fight. He said that we just protect the vehicle. Looking at May once more, everyone could not help but think that she and Mark were able to communicate telepathically. This was the second time they saw this happen, with the event against the outlaws in Browning Square being first. However, they had no need to question anything. They did not know, but because of May's calmness, they felt that there was no need to be scared in this situation. Mark was also the same, standing with confidence outside despite the danger. A minute passed, and Mark and the king were still staring at each other. The surroundings were already cold from how much killing intent was there in the king's eyes. He was trying to subdue Mark with that alone. However, it was impossible. Can we start already? Mark stretched his arms and shoulders from getting stiff. Sure enough, the infected king was pissed. Human. Hand my queen over. That was the first thing that the infected king said to Mark. When he saw that moving metal box that humans ride, passing through the bridge, the infected king was already prepared to play with them. However, he noticed something. It was something that he never felt before, attracting him to an individual inside the box. For the first time, he found a queen, his very own queen. He tried to connect to her, like how he was connected to his subjects. He commanded her to come to him, however, she rejected it. The infected king was furious. His kin, another person who stands above the infected, chose to go with lowly humans instead. He needed to take her to his side. He needed to take her. Take her. Take her. Take her. The urge kept boiling. However, he could not do any rash actions. These humans might harm her if he did. Hand her over, and I will make sure to kill all of you painlessly. The infected king had no urge to let these people go. After he got the queen back, these humans would follow the fate of all the survivors in his territory. They would become decorations in this blood-covered park. Tell me. Mark smiled. Why should I? Mark returned the same amount of killing intent, surprising and infuriating the infected king even more. I found her first. She is my object, and she doesn't want to go with you. Mark smirked. You have been rejected already. Face the facts. Don't be a sore loser. The infected king froze. His face was twisted. Sure enough, that struck a nail on the head. However, as an infected king, he needed a queen. This was not the first time he encountered one. However, that first one was already taken by another king. Now, he had a chance to have his own, and yet, she was following a human instead. Well, Mark suddenly added, if you want her, why not come get her? Mark provoked the infected king, even to the extent of inviting him over with his finger. Crack. Bang. Sure enough, despite his intelligence and status, he was still an infected. Violent, easily triggered, and craving for human blood and flesh. As Mark provoked him, he was not able to hold back anymore. The pressure under the infected king's feet grew, the cement under it cracked as he kicked the ground. Mark crossed his hands as the infected king appeared in front of him in an instant. The king then jumped to the side, forcing Mark to shift his guard at the last second. Blocked by his right arm, a brutal kick connected from his side. SHOOM. Mark flew from the impact. Boom. And crashed at the hotel on the south side of Logan Square. A building that was more than 130 meters away. Looking at how the face of the building crumbled with a large hole on it, Mark could have flown further if he did not crash on that building. Everyone watching that scene inside the vehicle stared with their eyes dilated. In contrast, May was shivering. Not because of fear but anger. She was about to rush out of the car to fight. Nevertheless, she held herself back as her ring vibrated. "Will boss be fine after getting hit like that?" Roan asked, getting ready to fight himself. No one here knew how strong Mark really was. Even Felicia and the others never saw him getting hit before. Weak. Just like how humans are. Fragile. The infected king sinisterly smiled as he saw the dust in the broken wall of the hotel that had a more than 2-meter diameter hole after Mark crashed onto it. Leaving his sight from the wrecked building, the infected king turned towards the vehicle. But then, as the infected king took a step forward, he felt danger. By reflex, the infected king jumped backward. Suddenly, in the place he stood before, a mark left by something sharp appeared on the ground. Then, he felt a surge of thick, killing intent. Where was it coming from? It came from nowhere else but from the wrecked hotel building. A silhouette stood by the hole. It was Mark, who looked like a ragged beggar now with his clothes mostly torn apart. His right arm was also bent in the wrong place and the wrong angle. Opening his wings and with a red glow on his back, Mark flew. Once again, he landed standing between the infected king and the vehicle. "Darn, it hurts." Mark laughed. "It feels like I got hit by a truck and almost traveled to another world." On the other hand, the infected kind jumped back once again, unable to believe what had just happened. The weak human, after all, was still alive. "So, you're a kick type, huh?" Mark stared at the infected king, assessing him once more. While he was caught off guard and got flown away, Mark provoked the infected king on purpose. He wanted to see if this guy mutated naturally or with a paranormal catalyst like the first one he encountered. As the infected king became blindly furious, he would use the attack he was most comfortable and confident in. It was the same for humans, after all. And this infected kind, he mutated naturally with highly enhanced physical strength, especially on his legs and feet. However, it was still a mystery if that was all that he had. Day 131 to 1:25 p.m. Logan Square, Franklintown, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. With his rugged appearance, Mark stood between the infected king and his vehicle. He could not help but tilt his head as he stared at the king's shock-filled face. "What? Why are you so surprised?" Mark then looked at the hotel where he crashed. "I guess, because it's the first time that someone survived, huh?" It was not hard to realize that it was not the first time this infected king kicked someone towards that building. In fact, aside from the hole that was created after Mark crashed onto the wall, there were other traces of blood splatters on the building's face and other places around Logan Square. There were dried splattered blood on the walls of the hotel, in the middle of the road, and in other places, there were even remains of dried guts stuck with the dried blood. Well, thinking about it, if a regular person was to receive that kick, the impact alone would already mangle their bodies. And when they struck the face of the hotel or any hard surface, they would instantly turn into meat paste. On the other hand, Mark, who had a body that was far sturdier than a regular human, created a hole instead. "You should check first whether I'm really dead before uttering such nonsense." Mark smiled as he used his left hand to put his right arm back into position. Seeing Mark's arm broken like that, Roan and the others gulped. Just how painful was that? Even his bone protruded out of his skin and the skin around the injury was already swelling. Strangely though, there was no blood dripping from it. Seeing him pull and twist the broken arm back into position, they could not help but wince. If it was them, there was no need to mention being able to hold it. They would wail in pain instead. However, when Mark put his broken arm back into its right position, the swelling started to heal and the wound started to close. It was as if they were watching an injury being rewind back to its initial state. They could not believe it when Mark raised his arm like nothing and started moving his hand as if it was never broken. "Look," Your kick did nothing but destroy my clothes. Mark smiled while moving his arm and clenching his fist repeatedly. He was definitely provoking the infected king even more. And of course, this kind of provocation was very effective towards the infected king. Mark felt delighted as he watched that twisted face for some reason. And there, the infected king kicked the ground and vanished. Appearing above Mark, he unleashed a downward kick. Boom! Mark jumped to the side, causing the kick to miss. That, however, made the attack hit the concrete road, bursting it into an explosion of debris and dust. The kick was too devastating that even May and the others inside the vehicle felt the ground shaking. Finally, the infected king began to become serious. He far underestimated Mark, thinking that he was like the other humans that he encountered before. It was because all of them already turned into corpses that decorated the current Logan Square. Inside the infected king's mind, he finally understood. Since the start, he already felt that Mark and several humans inside the vehicle were strange. It was as if there was a strange power within them. However, he neglected that fact since he saw them as nothing but ants that he could crush without any issue. Still, despite being serious, the infected king was surprised. Mark was able to avoid his attack where he moved at his fastest speed. Taking opportunity from the missed attack, Mark jumped towards the infected king. With his left foot glowing red, Mark made a clockwise spin and unleashed his own kick towards the enemy. Halfway through Mark's kick, the infected king noticed the incoming attack. Using his other foot, the infected king ignored the flying dust and debris and kicked the ground. He jumped forward, towards the direction of the fountain. This way, Mark's attack would not reach him at all. Or so he thought. Landing forwards, the infected king looked behind him to see how Mark missed his attack. Then, his eyes dilated as he saw Mark halfway his kick, behind him. Bam! Mark's kick connected with the infected king's face, causing him to fly towards the blood-filled fountain. Comparing the strength of their kicks, Mark's was clearly weaker. However, his attack was sharper and precise while the infected king had more speed and strength. Hey! What is that? Mariella could not help but voice her confused thoughts as she saw what happened. Not only her but Roan, Elise, and their parents were shocked at what they had seen. Sure enough, the infected king's attack was unbelievable on its own. However, what Mark did was unexpected for them. Everyone saw that halfway through the movement of his kick, the infected king already dodged. The kick should have missed there already. But then, Mark turned into a surge of black mist that followed behind the infected king and appeared there in the same position. The moment that the enemy turned to look behind, Mark's kick was already on his face. That surprising movement gave the infected king no chance to dodge at all for the second time. The infected king crashed onto the fountain, breaking off a part of it. The muddy blood slowly spilled out as the infected king stood up. He was all covered with that disgusting liquid, but his red eyes that were staring at Mark with absolute fury could not be hidden at all. Attack! The infected king roared, finally commanding his generals to act. At the same time, Mark gave the signal to May, telling the others inside the vehicle to go out for battle. Without hesitation, every mutator in the vehicle except May went out, showcasing their own abilities. And the most anticipated of them all was Mariella and Roan. Roan transformed. His forearms covered with black fur, a pair of black triangular ears appeared on his head, a long black tail appeared on his back, and he grew sharp claws and fangs. His eyes had a yellowish glow with that slit-like eyes of a cat's. Like Felicia, Roan was also a feline mutator. It was absolutely aligned to Mark's theory about mutators sharing the same family. Their colors might be different, but their mutation had a similar appearance. On the other hand, Mariella was even more unexpected. Her hair became colored like red maple during fall, and on her back, a pair of wings appeared with stunningly beautiful red and black feathers. Grabbing an assault rifle with both her hands, she immediately soared onto the air. Wow, that's surprising, Mark said, looking behind at that pair of beautiful wings, not minding the fur-covered general already attacking him. Bam! Roan, with stunning speed, appeared to block the fur-covered general. "Boss, can you pay attention to the fight?" Roan said, troubled. Although he was able to stop the guy in front of him, it seemed that he would be on the losing side if this kept on. Mark turned to Roan. "You can handle that guy, right? Take him away." Finishing those words, Mark appeared beside the fur-covered general and gave a powerful kick. Being locked in a contest of strength with Roan, he was not able to dodge that attack and was thrown away. "Follow that guy. Fight over there." Mark shooed Roan as he faced the other incoming infected generals. Roan grumbled but chased after the enemy designated to him. Then, Mark intercepted the attacks of the infected generals. The second to arrive was the infected girl with blades. She slashed towards Mark, trying to sever his neck in one go. Mark could not help but become surprised as to how fast the girl swung her arms. If Mark was not alert, his neck would have been sliced off. "Felicia, this is yours," Mark suddenly shouted as he caught the arm of the girl as he did another slice. With a judo-like shoulder throw, Mark flung the girl in another direction while his arms glowed bright red. Felicia, who was surprised for suddenly being called out, looked at Mark for a second before chasing after the girl. Next to arrive before Mark was the red hawk, sweeping down to him with its sharp claws. Mark stepped to the side, evading the claws that passed an inch in front of his face. Grabbing one of the hawk's feet with both hands, Mark threw it towards Mariella that was flying in the air. Surprised, Mariella evaded. The hawk managed to regain its balance and flew in the air. Now, however, it was facing Mariella. The next infected generals came towards Mark in succession, and one by one, Mark used different methods to send them towards different directions. He also called upon the people behind him to face the opponent he chose for them. The earthworm woman was designated to Ernst. The metal lizard was assigned to Sandy. Arnold was facing the old-faced child, and lastly, the bull-sized infant did not charge forward at all. It looked like its ability did not lie in fighting at all. Seeing how his entourage was divided just like that, the infected king became even more furious. And there, he started to transform. His eyes turned black with a greenish sheen. Multitudes of spikes grew out of his limbs, with larger ones on his legs and feet. His mouth split into several parts and a pair of long and thick antennas grew out of his forehead. "A locust, huh?" Mark muttered as he saw the transformation. Many would think that it was just a common grasshopper. However, the color, the antennas, and eyes gave it away. Looking at those features, Mark remembered a certain species of mostly wingless locusts. The Rhytodacrotinae. Screee. The infected king roared once more. At this roar, the whole place became noisy. It was because the thousands of infected that surrounded the Logan Square started roaring at the same time. Boom! With a loud sound, the whole fountain crumbled. It was because the infected king made his move. He vanished from the fountain with a very strong kick of his legs. Bam! 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 Mark frowned. His eyes could not follow the infected king's speed at all. All he was able to see and hear was the uncontrolled kicks of the infected king as he jumped around towards different directions. In every jump, a crater would be left from both the impact of landing and the force of the next jump. Dust started to fly around even more as more and more crater appeared everywhere. Fortunately, he did not have to worry about other things. He was the sole target of the infected king. And unless Mark died, the infected king was unlikely to change target. After all, in this locust's eyes, Mark stole his supposed queen. Hup! Mark jumped away from where he stood. Boom! The place where he just left burst at the infected king appeared there. I actually wanted to settle this with just physical abilities, but it's impossible, huh? Mark murmured as he lamented his lack of physical enhancement. He was sure that his innate abilities were still growing. If it was a while back then, he would not have the ability to contend with this infected king or Chimetris at all. Now, however, he was able to. Still, it was not enough. Mark's natural growth was far slower than what he needed. He had no choice but to rely on the crystals. And thus, Mark swung his hand to the side. All the crystals appeared at the same time, circling around his arm. At that scene, the infected king froze. He stared at that crystal with both wariness and desire. From those crystals, the infected king could feel a lot of power. A power that he did not have and needed to have. Day 131 to 1:28 p.m. Logan Square, Franklintown, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. The ground shook, the skulls hanged on the trees fell, craters appeared on the cement, and dust and debris flew around and scattered. As Mark intended, the fight in 6 other areas of Logan Square also started. This situation was only possible because, even though these generals were high-level infected, their intelligence did not develop high enough to override their instincts and make their own decisions. Without the command of the infected king, they would only attack the non-infected creature in front of them. And at the moment, their king was too enraged to give further instructions. Why did Mark do this? No reason in particular. He just did not want to make the others to only watch him fight. Besides, it was not a good thing if they really end up relying on him for everything dangerous. Thus, they must learn that Mark would not let them stand around as the gallery. And now, the battle commenced, with thousands of infected watching around Logan Square. ****** On the southeast side of Logan Square, the nearest area to the hotel where Mark crashed before, Roan and the fur-covered man was located. After being kicked away by Mark, the fur-covered man rolled on the ground before crashing at a metal post. It was one of the metal posts around the square where flags of different countries were displayed. In this case, it was the flag of Spain. The metal post bent from the impact. Of course, it was not enough to actually damage the fur-covered man. With rage fully expressed on his face, the fur-covered man stood up. There, he saw Roan standing in front of him. "Boss already told us about mutation levels of infected. Just what level is this guy?" Roan muttered as he was basked with the killing intent of the enemy. Bam! The fur-covered man kicked the ground and rushed towards Roan. That stomp of his foot actually created webs of cracks on the cement. The man ran like a ferocious wolf and arrived in front of Roan to grab him. But then, to the man's confusion, Roan's image blurred. As he grabbed onto Roan, his arms passed through Roan's visage as it vanished. It was an afterimage after Roan moved in the last second before he was grabbed. The man immediately turned to his right. There, he saw Roan standing several meters away. Roan was a level 3 mutator. His strength was considerably enhanced, but that was not his forte. Since he had a cat mutation like his younger sister, his specialty was speed. In a speed contest, Roan was still slower compared to the infected king. But there was one thing that he excelled over the insanely strong infected. The infected king relied on the mutated muscles on his legs, using its strength and muscle springs to move fast. That was why every time the infected king used his speed, he would end up crushing the ground because of the first kick. Because of this, every time he moved, there would be considerable noise and damage to the surroundings. Roan, on the other hand, was entirely different. He relied on his strengthened leg muscles leaned towards flexibility and motor functions. And the result, no matter what movement Roan had, there was almost no noise that was created by his feet. He was like a fleeting ghost. Or in video game terminology, he was an assassin type. With his sharp claws and that kind of noiseless movement, there was no doubt that he was in that category. Seeing Roan after evading his attack, the fur-covered man clenched his furry fingers, letting out several large claws not any less sharp than what Roan had. With that, he rushed again. This time, intending to tear Roan apart with those dirty claws. Wham! The fur-covered man pounced at Roan and attacked from above. Roan, however, swayed his body out of the way before taking several steps back. As the attack missed, the large claws dug into the cement without any resistance. Since Roan evaded once again, the man quickly pulled his claws out of the ground, tearing a large part of the concrete road. Bam! The man smashed the concrete stuck on his claws to the ground, crumbling it to pieces, and charged towards Roan once more. But there, Roan leaned forward and vanished from the man's eyes. Shing! The fur-covered man froze. He turned his head behind him and saw Roan standing with their backs facing each other. "I'm not really fond of dragging things out, so I'll end this here," Roan said as he waved his hat to the side, splattering the blood on his claws to the ground. With those words, the fur-covered man's head fell to the ground first, followed by his body. Roan looked at the others. Their battle was still ongoing. However, that was not what worried him. The real threat here was the quantity of infected that was eager to tear off their flesh. He had no idea how everyone would be able to escape this without sacrificing anyone. On the northeast side of Logan Square, where the statue of Galatia Pennypacker stood, Felicia and the Blade Girl contended. Compared to her brother, Felicia was having a hard time with her opponent. Felicia could fight based on her experience and with the aid of her mutation. However, she was never actually trained to do so. She had clumsy acts and a lot of unnecessary movements. Her speed had compensated her lack of skill in this regard. But now, she was fighting an infected with the same speed as hers. Because of this, her lacking skills became more apparent. The worst part here was that the Blade Girl was moving like a professional fighter. If not for the lack of intelligence of the Blade Girl, Felicia would have long been beaten in this fight. Flexibility, speed, the sharpness of attacks, and killing intent, the Blade Girl had all this. Shing! The Blade Girl swung her right arm, with her blade intending to behead Felicia. Felicia jumped back unnecessarily, afraid of the attack. If one could overwhelm his enemy, these kinds of large movements were still acceptable. However, as Felicia was on the weaker side, these kinds of unnecessary actions could spell life and death. After evading the attack, Felicia wanted to counterattack. However, Felicia was farther than she needed to do it. Not only that, but she also staggered as she lost balance for some reason. And when she raised her head, the Blade Girl's blade was already shining before her eyes. In fear, Felicia closed her eyes by reflex. Clang! "What are you doing? Don't close your eyes in the middle of a fight." Felicia heard a voice in front of her, shouting in anger. Of course, that voice could not be any more familiar to her. "Roan," Felicia muttered, seeing her brother blocking the blade of her opponent. Shing! Roan waved his claws, which the Blade Girl evaded without problems. Seeing the enemy dodge and retreat, however, Roan did not chase her. The Blade Girl also did not move, wary about Roan's sudden appearance. "Our family just reunited. What are you doing? Do you want to die just like that?" Roan harshly reprimanded her sister. That harsh scolding whenever she did something wrong. Felicia kind of missed it. It always happened before, but she was too stupid to understand it at that time. After all, she was only a person described as book smart. Her social sense was harshly lacking. She did not even acknowledge her mistakes and never apologized. But this time was different. Sorry, Felicia, this time, apologized for her mistake. That stunned Roan, but he could only let out a satisfied smile. "I will not finish this fight for you," Roan said as he stepped aside. "I'll guide you from the side. You better follow my instructions." With those words from her brother, Felicia nodded. She readied her claws once more, facing the Blade Girl. Like a fleeting ghost, Roan appeared beside the statue to watch his sister's battle and instruct her. Seeing that the person that intervened left to the side, the Blade Girl seemed to be confused. However, she did not have any time to choose who to attack as Felicia charged forwards. Clang! The blade and the claws clashed with each other. Roan was also surprised as his sister's opponent actually knew how to block attacks with great precision. Shing! The Blade Girl counter-attacked with her free arm. The horizontal swing of the blade towards her neck caused Felicia to fall back once again. You don't have to retreat that much because of an attack like that. You can just duck or bend your body away. That way, you can do a counterattack immediately after her attack missed. Roan shouted, giving pointers to his sister, one after another. Okay. Felicia replied as she panted. Don't take short breaths. Roan followed up. Take deep breaths instead. Panting is unnecessary in battles. It will only make you more tense and uncomfortable. You will also lack enough oxygen that your body needs to function properly. That is why you staggered earlier. Felicia did not know why her brother knew these kinds of things. However, she had no reason to doubt him either. Thus, despite her nervousness and stress, she started to breathe deeper. And as she was in a dangerous situation, Felicia was able to feel the effects and become conscious of it. Taking a deep breath, she started to feel relaxed. Her muscles also lost its stiff sensation. Shing! The blade girl charged towards Felicia and swung her blade. Felicia's eyes dilated. However, unlike before, she was able to see the attack more clearly. Felicia was about to take a great distance once more to avoid it, but what her brother said before echoed in her mind. Don't retreat too much. Just bend my body, Felicia spoke in her mind. The blade girl swung her arm, trying to behead Felicia. And there, Felicia bent her body backward. As if things slowed down, she could clearly see the blade passing over her face. She was unused to that movement, however. Felicia lost balance and fell backward instead. However, she was not too nervous anymore. She was able to judge the situation differently from before. Felicia did not let herself fall to the ground. Instead, she bent her body further, with both her hands reaching the ground before her head or back. She then kicked the ground, wanting to bend her body to an upright position and recover from the fall. After kicking with the left foot first, the right foot followed. Bang! That was when she felt something getting hit by her right foot. In a hurry, Felicia landed upright and quickly looked at her opponent. Ah! The blade girl was sent flying with blood splattering from her mouth. What happened? Felicia was both surprised and confused. Did I do that? Felicia looked at her brother, who was also surprised. Roan did not expect that to happen. When Felicia kicked the ground, her left foot was in the right direction. The right, however, went up directly from under the blade girl's body. Since the blade girl was amidst her attack, her body was leaned forward. Felicia's right foot heavily bashed against the blade girl's chin, causing her head to get forcefully knocked upwards following her slender framed body. The blade girl landed about 3 meters away with a thud. As soon as she could, she stood up once more. Several teeth fell as she opened her bleeding mouth. Of course, this injury was far from something that could kill her. Still, Felicia was now on the right track. With her brother's instructions, she started to overwhelm the blade girl. As that happened, Felicia began to gain more confidence in her abilities, and it helped a whole lot in the situation. And soon, the blade girl was unable to move anymore, with her body having a lot of injuries from the battle. The thing only left to do was to destroy her brain. As Felicia and Roan were about to do that, however. Hey, is that still alive? If she is, don't kill her, we might be able to use her later. Mark shouted from his location, making the siblings look at each other with a sigh. Day 131 to 1:32 p.m. Logan Square, Franklintown, Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America. Mark glanced at Roan and Felicia as they hurriedly looked for something to restrain the blade girl. But suddenly, he jumped to the side. Bam! A crater appeared on the ground where he stood just a moment ago. Too much dust was flying around as the road east of the fountain got riddled with large craters. Of course, the culprit was none other than the infected king that Mark could not even see properly anymore. Mark might have been monitoring the fight of everyone since he decided to do that spontaneously. However, it did not mean that he was free himself. In fact, he was only able to do that because he could not get a proper angle to attack the infected king. And just like the infected king's mutation, a locust, he was jumping around in insane speed. Boom! Mark did not like the sound of that. Along with that loud sound, the dust flying around was suddenly swept towards another direction. Without further ado, the wind manipulation crystal shined, and the wind aided him to get out of the way. Bam! A larger crater appeared on where he stood before. Once again, it was even a foot deep at the center. That first boom was not an attack, it was the sound created as the infected king moved beyond the sound barrier. "This is getting annoying," Mark muttered as he jumped away once again. Bam! If this continued, I will have no other choice but to kill this guy. Mark could not help but frown. Since the start, Mark already had the thought to capture the infected king. After all, even though he already had one back in the base, that one was more or less artificially mutated. It mutated because of the miasma he released during his fight with Garvlam in Bay City. This guy he was facing now, however, was totally different. It was a natural mutation, and its abilities were all in physical aspects. If this guy was studied further, there might be a chance to know what was the difference between the monarch types and the other types of infected. Of course not, you jest. Mark was a hoarder, both in reality and video games. He just could not help the urge to collect things. It was more apparent towards unique items and creatures. There was also the thought that keeping them might help in the future. He was the type of gamer that would collect potions for the end boss fight but ended up not using any. And there, the game ended, with more than a quarter of his storage containing different kinds of potions. Actually, if not for the fact that Mark was a person who was struggling for money back in the days, his room would be filled with tons of collectible items. Now, however, money did not mean anything anymore. Mark could just take anything he wanted as long as he saw it. It would be harder to collect things, especially otaku stuff, these days, but Mark would definitely bring them home if he found one. And because of the outbreak, Mark had a lot of things to collect. Strange infected, evolved animals, mutator abilities, and other things that popped out after the end of the world started. Of course, his thirst could not be satisfied by just that. Unfortunately, not everything could be taken back home just like that. Like the first king type he encountered, he needed to amputate its limbs to capture it. He had to make do with a broken collectible, which frustrated him a little. Thus, he wanted to capture this guy in pristine condition. Unfortunately, it was even more impossible. Not to mention trying to cut off the infected king's limbs. Mark could not even aim at this guy with the speed that he could not follow. Ah, right. Mark had an idea. Using the wind manipulation crystal, he set up a trap. As Mark jumped away again, he controlled the wind around his previous position and then trapped the infected king in place. Bam! A crater appeared in that place, and Mark immediately controlled the wind. Boom! The wind trap was scattered without being able to capture the infected king. Darn, I guess it won't work, Mark grumbled as he evaded the next attack. Inside the vehicle, May and the others watched Mark avoid the attacks being thrown at him. It was really amazing how he was able to evade even though no one here was able to see the movements of the infected king. Mark was only able to do this by following the mental fluctuations of the infected king. This time, he was using his mind more than his eyes. Unknown to most of them, someone was able to see the movements of the infected king to some degree. Mark's ring vibrated, making him smile. Then, the only thing he needed to do was to find the right timing. While Mark was planning to catch the infected king and Roan's and Felicia's battles ended, the others were still facing their current opponents. Above the Logan Square, Mariella soared, evading the relentless pursuit of the Bloodhawk. Mariella was not someone gifted with high athletic abilities. Because of that, she could only fly away while shooting her gun. Unfortunately, the Bloodhawk was able to evade bullets that were about to hit its head. Despite that, the Bloodhawk had a large body and wide wingspan. It was a big moving target, and most of the bullets Mariella shot already tore holes on the Hawk's body. However, unlike the other generals, the Bloodhawk was a mutated eater. It was capable of flight because of it having a higher level of mutation. Nevertheless, it was still an eater variant. It was an infected with a dead body. It could not feel pain. And because its body was large, the small bullets of the assault rifle could not tear its wings. Right now, Mariella was in a tight position. Next was Sandy. Among the currently occurring battles, she was the nearest to the vehicle. Right now, she was contending with the metal lizard in terms of strength. However, the two were at a stalemate. Both of them were specialized in defense, and their attacking power was lacking. Even if the two fought here for several days straight, it would be questionable who would be the winner. Or maybe, the infected would win if that really happened. It was because Sandy was still a human that needed to rest and eat. On the north side of the fountain, Arnold was fighting the old kid. And like Mariella and Sandy, he was also having a hard time. Arnold's mutation was most likely to be an opossum. It could be distinguished by the color of his fur, his beady eyes, and a rat tail. As such, he was a close-quarters combatant. In fact, with his slightly muscular body, he preferred using his hands than guns. That, however, was a bad matchup with his current opponent. Opossums have poor eyesight and hearing. In exchange, it had a stronger sense of smell. The old kid's body was releasing greenish slime on his skin that had a very repulsive smell. For Arnold, who was keen to fight in close quarters, he was not able to do that because of the opponent's ability. Furthermore, Mark gave Arnold a warning. It was that green slime would absorb the liquid from anything it had contact with. Mark even said that while showing his dried-up palm after throwing the old kid in this direction. Arnold tried to get a metal bar from the debris to use, but the smell still prevented him from making continuous attacks towards the old kid. Last was Ernst that was battling with the earthworm lady. Ernst's ability was his highly acidic saliva. Normally, he would be able to finish his enemy as soon as his saliva made contact with the infected's head. However, his ability to launch his saliva from his mouth was limited. He still needed to approach the enemy to a certain distance. However, it was pretty much impossible in his current situation, where he was forced to dodge 10 whips of elongated earthworm fingers. The earthworm lady was using her fingers that was able to stretch out to 7 meters and use the wriggling fingers as whips to constrict her prey. Ernst was doing a good job dodging and using his saliva to counterattack by melting the disgusting fingers. It was despite the fact that a scientist like him was less athletic compared to the others here. The problem, however, was that the earthworm lady was able to regenerate her melted fingers and continue attacking. With the current situation of the four of them, their chances of winning were quite slim. Roan and Felicia, who already finished their battles, wanted to help. However, Mark divided the enemies for them to overcome by themselves. In the least, what they could do was give support if necessary. It was like how Roan saved Felicia when she made a mistake. Thus, Roan and Felicia could only watch for now. That guy is really amazing, isn't he? Roan suddenly spoke. Who? Felicia asked. Boss. Sir Mark. Yeah. Roan nodded. Do you understand why he divided the enemies to all of us? Well, I'm just an extra. It was more specific to you guys. Huh? Felicia was confused. Isn't it just because he wanted us to fight? There's that, but that's not the main reason, Roan replied. What did you realize when you were fighting this girl? Roan pointed at the tightly tied blade girl. I think. Felicia pondered. I lacked fighting experience and techniques. That reply made Roan nod in agreement, and there, Felicia realized. Don't tell me, Sir Mark wanted us to discern our weaknesses? That's right, Roan affirmed. That was why I said that he's amazing. When these infected attacked, Mark observed and discerned their abilities and chose a proper enemy for all of you. He did all that in a short period to achieve several goals in one go. Felicia totally understood now. Mark did not want them to only fight but learn while fighting. Furthermore, while Mark had his own fight, he was actually supporting the others to not make it too dangerous. It might be hard to notice while fighting, but now that Roan and Felicia were watching, they realized that the fatal attacks of the enemies would fail for some reason. Every time that happened, one of the crystals floating around Mark's arm would glow. They could not understand how Mark was doing that, but it was really odd if it was just a coincidence. ****** Mark jumped around, using the wind manipulation crystal to aid the speed of his movements. He was waiting for the right timing. He needed to create an opening to attack the infected king. While he was doing that, though, he would also control the wind to aid Arnold and the others. They had quite a number of close calls, after all. He needed to help them in one way or another, like making the wind blow harder to redirect the fingers of the earthworm blade, or by manipulating the airflow above to make the bloodhawk lose balance for a bit. Roan was right in his assumption. Mark wanted to make the members of his group learn their weaknesses. This way, they would know what they needed to improve on their own. It was an effective way, as Mark also had to prepare his people for the next wave of the outbreak. And then, the timing finally came. Instead of landing on flat ground, Mark jumped towards a deeper crater, causing the next attack of the infected king to be in that same place. Bam! The infected king landed a kick on that same crater and almost lost balance due to the uneven ground. As he regained his balance, however, he looked for Mark to continue attacking. Nevertheless, Mark was gone. But then, it noticed a fluctuation of energy nearby, making it face the direction it was coming from. As the infected king did that, he was already facing away from the vehicle. And there, the infected king was caught off guard. Bang! The sound of a sniper rifle echoed. The infected king froze and staggered as he felt the pain on his leg. As he looked down, he noticed the hole made by a bullet that passed through his flesh. Kryhhhhh. The infected king's painful and furious howl echoed across the center city.